Hello again, it's Mr. A, and I'm here to talk to you today about the English Renaissance as far as theater goes. Now the Renaissance, I'm guessing many of you have heard about the Renaissance before, whether it was in your social study classes or whatever. It's something that had a great deal of influence on the history of Europe and thus on the influence of us. So the Renaissance, what the word means is rebirth, and that's what it basically was. There was a rebirth of interest in Greeks and Romans. You see, what happened is that throughout most of the Middle Ages, people had kind of shoved that stuff aside because these were pagans, they weren't Christians, and so they thought, you know, they've got nothing to teach us. And what happened is that a library was discovered during the Crusades, as it happened, that had a lot of stuff from the Greeks and the Romans that had been preserved by the Muslim people. And so, as a result, suddenly all of these things that had kind of been forgotten were opened up again. And there was a great deal of interest in Greeks and Romans, and it really changed a lot of how Europeans looked at their whole world. Now, as far as what we're going to look at, we're going to look at the theater. So we're looking at the interest that came in their theaters, in their plays, and their mythologies. Now, this was happening all over Europe. If this was a college level class, we would probably spend weeks and months talking about Italy and France and Spain and Poland and Germany and lots of different places where the Renaissance affected theater. But we're only going to focus on one place here, and we're going to focus on England. And the main reason is because that leads us into Shakespeare, which is a very important name that I want you to know about. So we're going to talk about England. Now, England, the dates are actually a lot more set in stone than some of the other stuff. We're looking at the date from about 1550 to about 1640. That's kind of the English Renaissance as far as theater goes. 1550, right around there, there's a king that opens up the idea of being able to make these new plays. And then in 1640, we have what was called the Puritan Revolution, which basically shut it down. So in these about 100 years, we've got this new kind of theater happening. They already had this tradition from the Middle Ages of the mystery plays and miracle plays and stuff like that we talked about. But now things start to change a little bit. And one of the main changes is the purpose of theater. For them, the purpose of theater became entertainment. But they weren't like the Romans, because the English, even back then, were not like Romans. They didn't get excited about blood and death and all that kind of thing that the Romans were excited about. In fact, what they were very much excited about a lot of times was words. They got excited about wordplay. And as you go into a lot of this stuff, you see a lot of puns and a lot of like being very clever. And they were entertained by deep, thoughtful things. So that, as a result, we ended up having a lot of plays that were very thoughtful, that have continued to be thoughtful up until our time period. That said, there's also a lot of jokes. There's a lot of dirty jokes. If you have a good English teacher, they'll show you the different dirty jokes that are in there. But the main purpose was entertainment. So look around and you see people making money. And for the first time, the people that are making money in large measure are the actors. Actors became professionals at this time period. You could have people that would say, this is my job is to be an actor. Now, it's still not quite what we're used to. First of all, they were all men. This was actually a law during the time period. Women were not allowed to be actors. Now, it's not for the reason some people think. It wasn't because people thought women weren't good enough to be actors. It actually was the opposite. They figured that women were too good to be actors. You see, in this time period, this is the other main difference, is that it was not a noble profession. It wasn't considered a thing that people should do. I think partly it was considered still a little bit like lying. You were kind of just pretending to be something you weren't, and so it's kind of looked down on from a church perspective. But I think also the main people that had been paid to act before were wandering beggars and mummers troops, and these were not people that were looked up to. So being an actor wasn't something you really were all that proud to talk about necessarily. And as a result, women were not allowed to do it. However, whatever, at this time, for the first time, we have people who made their livings at the theater. Now, we're going to talk about Shakespeare, actually, at some length. And that'll be a separate video, maybe two. But let's talk first about some of the other people that are writing this time period. And the first one I want you to know about is Christopher Marlowe. Now, Christopher Marlowe was a brilliant writer. In fact, a lot of people look to him as somebody that kind of innovated a lot of the stuff that Shakespeare went on to perfect. He was a very brilliant writer. In fact, some people think that he was the guy that actually wrote Shakespeare's plays. I don't believe this, by the way. I'm going to put a link down there to the whole conspiracy theory stuff because it's interesting to think about. It's probably not true. But in any case, some people believe that he might have written Shakespeare's plays because he was that good. He was a very great writer. And something we didn't know for some time later is that he actually was also a spy. He was kind of like a Renaissance James Bond. He would pass information on to the Queen about people that were trying to take her down. You see, Chris Marlowe was Catholic, and his Queen was a Protestant. And so many people believe that he would be interested in taking her down, and so he would let them think that, let them tell him their plots, and then he would go ahead and report on it so that those plots wouldn't work. Another interesting thing about Marlowe died in a knife fight. He apparently, according to the official story, he was in a tavern with friends, and there was an argument over cards or something like this, pulled knives, and he was stabbed and killed. Now this is where the conspiracy theory people get into it, because they say, okay, if I'm a spy, and if someone finds out I'm a spy and I need to disappear for a while, might be a good idea for me to fake my own death. And so some people believe that that was something that he did. He faked his death and then just disappeared, went to Europe and stayed in hiding for the rest of his life. But if you're going to be a great writer and you still want to write, you can't write things under your name if you're in hiding. And so they found this guy named William Shakespeare, and he just put his plays under that person's name. Again, probably none of that is true. I think it'd make a really great movie if you wanted to make that up. But he was a great writer. And one play that he wrote that's very well known is called Dr. Faustus. So we're going to talk about this. Now, many of you have heard of Dr. Faustus, even if you don't know that name. If you ever heard any stories about a person that sells his soul to the devil for power or for knowledge or something like that, that all goes back to Dr. Faustus, which was actually a legend. It was a German legend that Marlowe took and made into a play, but he kind of popularized it. So most of what you know about the legend comes from Marlowe. So let's see if we can show you that play. Okay, now again, this is a summary, it's a simplified version. There's a lot more going on than what I'm going to tell you, but I'm going to give you the basic idea of Dr. Faustus. So the main character is Dr. Faustus. Dr. Faustus is a doctor of philosophy. He's not a medical doctor the way we would think about it. He's kind of more of a scholar, kind of a professor. And he's learned all sorts of things. And he's kind of getting bored with the things that he knows. He wants to learn more stuff. So among all the things he's learned about how to summon devils. And so he makes a circle, a magical circle on the floor, and he calls on the devil. And the devil appears, and he says, I'll make a deal with you. I will sell my soul to you if I can have your powers for until I am 72 years old. And the devil agrees to this because he figures that 72 years, whatever, it's not very long in the long scheme of things because he will have his soul then forever. He also figures that Faustus is probably going to do some evil things with his power, which will also be bad. So he makes that deal, and Faustus now has all these magical powers. And he's got friends, and his friends see what he's done, and they're like, what are you doing, Faustus? You've done a terrible, horrible thing. No matter how much you like having this power, it's going to ruin you. Eventually you'll be in hell. And Faustus is like, don't worry about it. I know what I'm doing. I have a plan. And then for most of the play, he's kind of using his powers in, honestly, a lot of very frivolous, unimportant ways. He turns himself invisible, for example, and sneaks into the Pope's bedroom just to kick him in the butt and just to be mean and stuff like this. He calls up the spirit of Helen of Troy, who is the most beautiful woman of all history, apparently, just so she can be his girlfriend, sort of thing. Just doing a lot of really foolish things. And then it comes to the very last scene of the play, in which Faustus is now, it's the night before he's supposed to give up his soul, and his friends come to him and he's like, oh, isn't it foolish what you've done? Don't you feel terrible about this now? And Faustus is like, nope, now I know what I'm gonna do. And you've realized he's had a plan this whole time. See, he says, in the middle of all of my discoveries about the devil and stuff, I also learned things about God. And I discovered, according to this passage right here, it says, if a man will call on the name of God, God will save him. Therefore, his plan the whole time has been to wait for the last minute and then call on God, and then God will save him. Now you see the arrogance here, the pride. Faustus not only believes that he has outsmarted the devil, but that he has outsmarted God. Because obviously that's not what that means. Calling on God and praying and all that isn't something you can't sin all your life and then pray and then say, I call on God at the last minute and think you're going to go to heaven. It doesn't work that way. But he figures he's got God like trapped. He has God trapped in his words. And if God doesn't save him, then it's showing that God's a liar. So he is going to now, at the very last minute, call on God. So he builds another magical circle on the floor. Now, why does he build a magical circle to pray to God? Well, because that's what he's been used to calling on devils with. And this gives you an idea of part of the problem. He starts calling on God. He says, oh, please, come and save me, Beelzebub. Didn't work. I must be using the wrong name. He goes and looks through his books, try to find the right names. Oh, there it is. Please come save me, Mephistopheles. No, that's not right either. He keeps on trying to call on the name of God and accidentally calling on names of the devil. Marlowe's point is that calling on God isn't something you just do. It's something you practice, and he is out of practice. And so the time starts ticking away. He hears the bells ringing. Dong, dong. Oh no, it's almost midnight. I'm out of time. I'll burn my books, I swear. But it's too late. The devil arises, grabs him, and yanks him down to hell. And that's the end of the play. Now, do you remember the term hamartia? A hamartia is a fatal flaw. We talked about this during Greek drama. It's a character in a tragedy that has done something that that either does something or has made a mistake that causes his destruction, and that is usually something inside his character. It's not something outside, it's something that he has done. Now, you see in the Renaissance, because they're going back to the Greeks, you see these same kind of hamartias start to show up again. And it's certainly there in Faustus. Now, his fatal flaw is actually pretty obvious. Pride. Pride. He believes he's so smart and so intelligent that he can dance with the devil and still come out on top. And Marlowe's point is he can't do that. So, know that about Dr. Faustus and know about that play. Now let's go on to another guy. Now we're talking about a guy named Ben Jonson. Now Ben Jonson was a contemporary with Shakespeare. In other words, he lived at exactly the same time, and he was also a writer. Shakespeare and Jonson apparently knew each other and apparently seemed to have bounced some ideas off of each other every so often. But they were very different kind of playwrights. Both very popular in their day, although nowadays people don't generally know about Ben Jonson unless they're studying theater history. But Ben Jonson was different than Shakespeare because he was very highly educated. Shakespeare was not. Shakespeare actually was self-educated. He basically had like a very basic grade school education, and then he taught himself by reading a lot. Ben Jonson, though, had a very good education. He spoke a lot of languages. He spoke like, German and French and Spanish and Latin and Greek and all this stuff. He knew all this stuff. And he believed in his studies that he had discovered the proper way, the correct way to write a play. And there were those that believed him. There were those that agreed with him. They would see his plays and say, yes, that is the correct way. That is the right way to do it. And I always get the sense of it being just a bit snotty about that. Like, for example, when Shakespeare wrote a play called Julius Caesar, which was based in Rome, Ben Jonson ripped it apart. He laughed at it. He said, oh, you fool! These people didn't think like this. The Romans didn't think like this. None of them are speaking any Latin or anything at all. How are you you're making them act like English people would? Well, yes, because that was Shakespeare's point. Shakespeare was trying to get his audience, who were English people, involved in the play. But that wasn't what Ben Jonson wanted to do. He wanted to make something that was proper and correct. Anyway, though, he did make some great plays, despite the kind of stuffy attitude that he may have had. And the play that I want you to know about is called Volpone. Or some people pronounce it Volpone. Doesn't matter to me. I'm going to call it Volpone. Okay, so the main character of Volpone is this rich man whose name is Volpone. Volpone, by the way, is a word that means a fox. Now, he's not literally a fox, but every character in Volpone has a name, well, almost every character anyway, has a name that suggests an animal. Now, if you think of a character, if you have a guy whose name is Mr. Fox, what do you expect that character to be? Well, probably sneaky and clever and a little bit tricky, like that. And Volpone is like that. He's a very rich man that wants to be much richer. And so he's come up with this plan. He has made himself pretend to be sick. So he's lying in his bed, pretending to be very, very sick. And he's called on the other rich people in the town. I'd like to say they were his friends, but they're not really his friends. They're just other rich people. And he calls them to come in one at a time and talk to him. And Volpone's like, oh, I am sick and I am dying. Yeah, that's too bad. Why are you calling me about it, though? Oh, it's so sad because I have no one to leave all my fabulous wealth to. You could leave it to me. I'm your friend. Oh, I wish you were my friend, but if you were my friend, you would pity me to be here like this. You have a lovely, lovely home. I wish I could only die in a lovely home like yours. Well, tell you what, since you're such a friend of mine, I'm gonna give you my home. Here is my deed to my home, and you can have that. And he does that because he thinks that by doing this, Volpone's going to make him his heir in his will, and then he'll get all that back along with all of Volpone's stuff as soon as Volpone dies, which he believes is going to happen soon. And he does this to all of his friends. Well, there are 3 people, and all their names have names having to do with like carrion birds. Their names like vulture and crow and stuff like this. And again, in other languages, so it's not quite so obvious. But he talks to this guy and he gets his house. He talks to this guy and he gets him to disinherit his son and get all of his stuff. He talks to this guy. This guy has a very lovely wife. And he convinces him that, I really wish that I had a wife like yours. And so this guy tries to convince his wife to just kind of spend some time with him to try to do that. Now, to her credit, she doesn't actually let him seduce her. He does try to rape her, but so make that out of what you want. But in any case, though, Volpone's a very bad guy. These guys are not very good guys because they're all very greedy and trying to take their stuff. At the end of it, Volpone fakes his death. He pretends that he has died and he leaves everything in his will to Mosca. Now, Mosca was his servant. Mosca's name means a fly. And that's what Mosca has been so far in this play, is just this little guy that does whatever he's told. And Volpone figures that now that he has faked his death, he can keep using all the stuff that he's got and Mosca will officially own it, but he'll keep on using it. But a fly is also something that eats on carrion, something that scavenges on carrion. And Mosca decides, well, if I'm officially the ruler of all of this and I own all of this now, well then what I really need to do is get rid of my real master so that it'll all actually be mine. And so he does something, it's a very clumsy attempt, but he makes a clumsy attempt to kill Volpone, and Volpone realizes that the only way for him to stay safe is to admit that he had faked his death. So he does. He admits that he faked his death, and he's not dead or he's not sick or anything like that. These guys are very upset, but they have lost all of their stuff. They get in trouble for fraud. He gets in trouble for fraud. Mosca gets in trouble. They all are punished. All of the good people are rewarded, and all the bad people are punished at the end. And that's the story of Volpone. It's actually got a lot more to it than that. There's a lot more going on than that. Volpone is a kind of simplistic, moralistic story, but there's a lot of jokes. There's a lot of silliness going on there, but it fit in with Ben Jonson's idea of how you make a play. Now, the next guy we're going to talk about is, of course, the big name. And when I say the big name, I don't mean just in English Renaissance. I mean really in theater anywhere, and that name is, of course, William Shakespeare. Now, William Shakespeare is widely considered to be the greatest writer in the English language. Not only playwrights, but of any kind. In fact, he might be the greatest writer in any language. There's a lot of reasons why we can talk about that. And truthfully, Shakespeare is his own subject, and I think I'm going to have that be his own video, so I will send another video on that. In the meantime, guys, I want to recommend that you all start working on your monologues if you haven't done those. I'm considering doing some kind of a Zoom hangout or something like that so that those of you that want to perform them can do so. Go ahead and answer that Jupiter message that I sent out and tell me if that's something that you want to do. And we'll get together again and I'll talk about Shakespeare the next time. Thank you.